Good morning. I'm Kevin Captain, Volusia County Community Information Director. I want to welcome everyone to today's panel discussion, coming to you live from the Jeff Crumley Production Studio at the historic courthouse in DeLand, Florida. The COVID-19 pandemic is slowly but surely coming to an end. And as we near that end, many employees are suffering from anxiety going back to work after having been working remotely for the past year or longer. We've discussed mental wellness before, and still, even at this stage, there's certainly a lot more to uncover. Today we're fortunate to have a diverse panel of professionals joining us for a mental wellness discussion. We're going to talk about mental wellness and the mitigation strategies we can utilize to help allay the anxieties associated with the transition from remote work back to the office, or just simply back to work. I'm so happy to introduce our panelists. First is Robin King. Robin is the president and CEO of CareerSource Flagler Volusia. Robin's been a leader with CareerSource for well over 20 years and continues to serve on many local boards that promote economic development. Robin also has a master's in mental health from the University of Central Florida and was the prominent motivator for the creation of today's panel. Thank you for being here, Robin, and thank you for all your coordinating efforts for today's panel.
Good morning, thank you.
Wonderful. And we also have Sean Abatessa. Sean is the Chief of Staff at Brown & Brown's Absence Services Group in Daytona Beach. Sean has a myriad of experience that includes law enforcement, leadership, sales, marketing, and operations. Sean is heavily involved in fostering the most optimal work environment where team members are valued and applicable resources are available to those who need them. And a particular note, Sean is a United States Air Force veteran who has not only personally experienced the effects of post-traumatic stress disorder, or as we know it as PTSD, he's also presented and advocated publicly about PTSD. Thank you for being here this morning, Sean.
Good morning, thank you for having me.
Wonderful to have you. We also have Helga Van Eckert. Helga is the Economic Development Division Director for the County of Volusia. Helga has well over 25 years experience in economic development as well as redevelopment strategies. Prior to coming to the County of Volusia, Helga served as the Executive Director of Flagler County's Department of Economic Opportunity. Good morning, Helga. Thanks for being here.
Good morning. I appreciate it.
Wonderful. And then we also have Mark Spivey. Mark serves at Halifax Health in Daytona Beach as the coordinator for the Center for Wellbeing, providing in-house support and psychotherapeutic care for the professional caregivers at Halifax. As a clinical chaplain and trauma psychotherapist, for more than 35 years, Mark's been providing the people of Volusia County with spiritual and psychosocial care, hospice, and life care. Thank you again for being with us, Mark. You've been on previous panels, and we certainly love your presence here today.
Thank you, Kevin. My pleasure.
Thank you. And we also have Courtney Edgecombe. Courtney is the president of the United Way of Volusia Flagler Counties and has been with the organization for 8 years. A Stetson graduate, Courtney serves on many community boards in both Volusia and Flagler counties, including One Voice for Volusia, among many others. As part of the United Way, Courtney aims to mobilize individuals, businesses, nonprofit agencies, and government partners to make a measurable change in our community. Good morning, Courtney, and thanks for being here.
Good morning. Thank you.
So, Robin, let's first begin. What is Alliance For, and why did the facilitators of Alliance For want to come together for this panel today for our business community?
So Alliance For is our business group that comes together twice a year. It is private business, economic development, workforce development, and education coming together to talk about what the workforce needs in development and how businesses can recruit and retain. And because we couldn't meet in person, we were looking for a subject that was going to be something that all industries that we focus on would be concerned with. And because of a panel discussion you had had with Mark like a year or so ago, at that time even when Mark said, I think the question was, so how do you tell if you're burnt out, or how do you prevent burnout? And Mark said it's too late. And that was a year ago.
Isn't that amazing?
So, and you've seen since, you know, how much mental health, mental wellness is being discussed at all levels with the industries. So just thought it was going to be relevant to talk about the resources that we have in our community for our businesses.
It certainly affects everybody and every business. And Mark, when we use the term mental health, we're really trying to use the words mental wellness. Why do we want to change that sort of nomenclature?
Well, to define mental health just as an easy way, mental health is basically a look at your cognitive, your emotional, and your behavioral state of mind or state of being. How you think, how you feel, and how you act. And so all of that really is constantly operating to ensure that our behavior at work, our behavior in our personal life is operational and functional and intact. So we often overlook the fact that without good mental wellness, nothing really can operate. And we're good, very good, at shielding and putting on masks to hide and conceal our emotional or mental pain or our wounds. And so as a community, we're good at that anyway, and then when coronavirus showed up, we got better. And now that coronavirus is showing signs of changing and we're trying to reintroduce ourselves, we're challenged with trying to take our masks off, but we don't know how to go about it. We don't have skills, and we don't know where to look. And we're even more afraid now to talk to people about our state of mind or our sense of well-being. And we're living in a very dangerous and sort of Wild West culture. So it makes it all the more of a challenge for mental health professionals to even have conversations. So instead of saying mental wellness or mental illness, I like well-being, because how is your well-being? How are you doing?
So speaking of the well-being, and when we're talking about the workforce, and if we're a leader, manager, team member, what are some of the signs and symptoms that we could help identify or observe that could identify one of our colleagues in the workplace suffering from challenges with their mental well-being?
Some of the obvious ones we see in the workplace and in the world, as a matter of fact, are the common sense ones: withdrawal, isolation. Employees or human beings or people, wherever you're thinking and looking, they withdraw from activities they normally participate in. They stop showing up at lunch. If everyone takes the elevator, they take the stairs. They withdraw, they isolate, their mood changes. They become snappier or they become quieter. They develop an attitude of, I'm going to work, getting it done, and going home. And so you can see people becoming more reserved or becoming a little more snappy, a little less involved. So these are subtle cues that something's not right, but they don't want to be asked about it, and they're trying to pass. And so typically people will notice it, but they won't ask them. They won't ask what's wrong. They further encourage it by isolating and staying out of it. But we see mood changes and we see behavioral changes, and they're very small, they're very subtle, but no longer does she come to lunch with us. I wonder why. Well, no one asks her why. She's not okay. And of course we have private lives and personal lives, and all that's going on even when we're in the workplace. It doesn't just stop. Mm-hmm. And so having the conversation, are you all right? Instead of just saying, how are you, we really ought to change our language and say, how are you really? Or how are you inside? Or are you feeling all right? Are you settling in well? But we typically don't like to do that because a lot of us, let's be honest, we're afraid of the answer. And we're afraid that they might say something that triggers in our own life something we're trying to hide ourselves.
You know, the key word there that I picked out, that what you said, is withdrawal. And the withdrawal also goes to the fact that people will not come forward and ask for help. And when we're talking about mental well-being, we're always thinking about the stigma that's associated with it. And Sean, you're well familiar with how that stigma prevents people from wanting to come forward and seek help.
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned, I suffer from PTSD from my service over in the Gulf War, and it took me over 20 years from coming back to even seek help because of the stigma associated with it. You know, Mark went over some great signs and symptoms, but one of the things that we have to be cognizant of is the last 15 months during the coronavirus pandemic, and even moving forward in a hybrid work environment, there are signs and symptoms on Zoom and Teams meetings that you can observe as well. For example, somebody who starts to become late for their scheduled 9 a.m. Zoom or Teams meeting. Maybe they no longer turn their camera on, and you as a leader politely ask them to, and they still don't. And again, their appearance, as Mark mentioned, do they look fatigued? Those signs and symptoms can still be seen even in our new reality, which is the virtual world, and probably will be in a hybrid form going forward. So I think it's important that, as human beings, we interact and we read and feed off of each other in person like we are here today. But in the new world, there are signs that you can see through the screen.
Very good point. And even though, we're getting back to more in-person activities, a great point to illustrate is even on those virtual platforms, we can still observe those behaviors. And Robin, when it comes to employers and that necessity for employers to be keen on mental well-being, why is that so important?
What is the greatest asset any business has? Right?
Steve?
It's their team. It is the only asset they have that is not depreciating if they take care of it. And I can see questions in future interviews where a potential employee is going to ask, well, what did you do for your staff during the pandemic? Or, that this next generation that's coming into the workforce, I hope that they talk about this better than our generation has, and it's something to be mindful of. It's also something to practice. It's kind of going back to what Mark was saying, that we've not had these conversations on a regular basis. So if you are concerned to ask, because if they do say something, then what do you do with it, right? And so that's a new skill set that we all need to be developing.
So,
if I can add,
please.
if you think about it, in the past, people who have had PTSD, they haven't been as many. Now we all have it. I'm sorry, I don't know anybody who is, maybe not to the same extent or for such a wonderful cause, but I don't know anybody who comes to work today that doesn't think about what we've been through for the past year. And our employees have seen it, our businesses have talked about it, and I think this panel is so great because it's making that known to the business owners who maybe aren't thinking about it the same way because they're so caught up in their day-to-day needs and getting their businesses up and running again.
Well, and I remember Mark saying in a previous panel too that every single solitary person has mental well-being, whether it's issues or thoughts or whatever it is. We're all affected by it. Every single solitary one of us.
I recently did a conversation talk workshop with physicians about their own anxiety, depression, and stress, and very much like Sean's military, there is a huge no-no. You do not talk about your weakness and vulnerability. It exists in the medical world as well. There's a lot of pressure on physicians, both practicing and especially coming up, to either get with the program or get out. And so they don't often report mental illness, mental unwellness. So this is affecting your clinicians and the ones helping you just as well. But they dare not show it because they're risking loss of job, loss of status, loss of position, and sometimes loss of promotion because you can't risk telling the person who makes decisions about your career that you're having trouble or you need a mental health, a mental health day off. You're supposed to be as tough as iron, like a military. You're supposed to absolutely always have the answers, and that's an alarming problem. And suicide rates are going up amongst actual healthcare providers in America, about 1 to 2 per day in their lives. And these are physicians and nurses and providers with unspoken pain that they just don't feel safe to tell anyone. And I want that to stop. I want us to have open, honest conversations as easily as we're having right now every day about what's obviously staring us in the face. Our well-being. How are we? Simple things. No more surface, how are you? I'm fine. Let's talk about the truth. How are you doing inside? How are things?
It's in every industry too. So in doing some research for the panel, I learned that 40% of Americans have experienced some kind of negative mental health outcome related to the pandemic. So if you're thinking that it's not happening in your business or in your industry, it most definitely is.
I'm glad you bring this up. The statistics indicate that 38% of Americans are literally diagnosable. In other words, 1 in 4 people. So if you think of your 3 best friends and they're okay, it's you, clearly. so that's a huge, and that's just the reported percentage. So it's alarming how it stares us in the face, and we just will not address it because it's too close to home for all of us. Mm-hmm. And many of us have family and history and things in our own background that are family secrets and shameful. And way back in the 1800s in this country, we built asylums and locked people away. So we have a 200+ year history of shame and hiding away, and we really haven't broken through that like I'd like to see us do.
Because we need to keep it out in the open.
Keep talking about it.
And as we are opening up businesses, people are going back to work. Sean, for those in the workplace who are, as I said before, a leader, a manager, a supervisor, an educator, a liaison, what are some tactics and techniques that maybe they need to be aware of, as their staff gets back into work? And how can they intervene? How can they help? What can they do?
Sure. So as leaders, we've been around our workforce, our teammates. So we know what their nuances are. We know what their personality is like. And the first thing I'll say is we have 2 eyes and 2 ears for a reason. We can observe and we can listen to people. And it's amazing, if you observe and listen, people will show you the signs, or they will speak the signs very easily. You just have to know what to look for. First, you have to be empathetic. If you see a sign that we've already discussed, you have to put on the empathy hat, because you're about to enter a mode that is really important, which is start asking questions, and don't be afraid to ask questions. And the question is as simple as, how are you doing? Is there anything I can help you with? Is there anything on your mind that you can talk to me about? These are very simple questions, but you have to observe and be willing to ask that question. And I think, Mark alluded to it earlier, you have to be willing. I think we'll underscore willing, and you have to be aware of your surroundings. So I would say, to your question, be observant, be willing to ask the questions. Most times people will tell you what's on their mind. And then you have depending on how they answer, you have different paths to go down. We mentioned the signs and symptoms. If you notice one sign, that doesn't necessarily mean that individual needs help, but maybe a couple of those signs and symptoms put together, absolutely. So what should you do at that point? You want to make sure that they're not continuing to be vulnerable. If you feel that they need additional assistance, ask them if they would be willing to speak to human resources or somebody within the human resources department. If they don't and you're still concerned, go to your human resources department, let them know what you observed. It's good to get a second person's observations to make sure what you're seeing or feeling or hearing is accurate. And then last but not least, if you are very concerned about the individual, call 911. That's very important. If you fear for that person's life, you should take action and call 911.
Speaking, Sean, of asking the question, you kind of alluded to that earlier, Mark, and even, if you're, as a leader, that can be a difficult position to be in, is to approach the person that could be suffering from a mental well-being issue. What's the best way, Mark, to ask the question or to make that approach? And I know it's different from one person to the next, but certainly you've got some ideas on the most effective way to approach.
Well, I can share things that I do that seem to work with people. I sneak in the side door instead of coming in the front. So in other words, instead of confronting them and forcing them to go into defensive mode, I simply say, name one thing you're looking forward to today and name one thing you're not looking forward to. And they'll tell me. And then, of course, more will come out. And then once they say a few things, I can hold on to those things that upset you, you're frustrated, and you can just go with it. But I don't say, how are you? Yeah, and if someone asks me how I am, I say, how do you want me to be? And I do it on purpose to start a conversation. How would you like me to be? And so often I'll say, are you feeling okay? Is this a good day or a bad day? And then they'll say, well, I'm not sure yet. I says, make it a good day. It's about choices and attitude. So I don't come right out and just do the old standard, how are you? Because people are too well conditioned and trained to just say, fine, and keep walking. So I try different approaches with different people. And I'm in hospital and medical environments a lot. But in private practice, people come in, well, they're expecting to divulge. They're expecting to open up. And so simply, you know, at funerals or celebrations of life, people will often ask for advice. Mark, what do I say? And I'll often say, show up and shut up. Because people need presence more than they need your mouth. They need you to show up and listen. And if they feel they can trust and that you honestly care, they will tell you. Because it's there and it needs to come out. And so just being a present, available, eye contact, people can sense. There's radar. You know when someone's not all right. It's just a matter of asking. You know, it could be something like bad day, hard night, sleep well last night, kids giving you trouble again. Small things like that start conversations instead of the usual, how are you, how are you? So I look for obvious everyday human signs and ways to have conversations as if I were in my own home with my own family.
So the way the two of you have done this, so you're talking about that when you pass in the hallway, that is not where you're going to have a conversation.
Right.
And that empathy means that you sat down or you are present and you've asked the question and you're going to wait for an answer,
Absolutely.
as opposed to that
Right.
that exchange of
Right.
that's worthless.
Right, you're right. Well, sometimes what'll happen is, often what'll happen, it's a busy hospital. Let's just use the hospital. It's very busy, and so I can tell someone's not okay. I can tell. You can see it. Their body speaks volumes. Their mouth doesn't say anything. So I'll just tap them on the shoulder and I'll say, if you get a break or if you want to chat, you know where I am. That just gives them hope. That gives them the idea that throughout the day they can reach out. And I know they can't stop, and I know they can't do it right then, but later on they can by phone call, in today's world by text. Are you free? They'll pick up the phone. I'll do a lot of phone support throughout the day for people who are in the middle of a 12-hour shift who just need 10 minutes or 5 minutes or a little advice or a little encouragement or even validation that they did the right thing yesterday, or where can I go to get blank. I do a lot of referring and all people need is a place to touch where it's safe and know that someone cares and answers are coming. And it can be that quick and that simple and effective.
Well, I think the word trust, you used trust before. To me,
Yes.
that's always been one of the key things. If my staff or my coworkers feel that they can trust me and I can trust them, it creates that environment where you do feel comfortable having the conversation. And these are like great opportunities for individuals to talk in a larger entity. But when you're in a small business, it's much more difficult being able to keep those lines of communication open and know what it is that you should be saying and shouldn't be saying to your staff. You know, you're so harried and moving all the time. It's just a difficult thing that I think we have to take the time to breathe sometimes, right?
Yeah.
And just let our staff breathe right along with us.
Helga, you make a good point, and we deal with this all the time. And Halifax is a large system, it's a large hospital, but it's really small. And everyone knows
department, right?
everyone. Yeah,
Yep.
so and each department has its own family culture. And so there's this built-in fear, like there would be in anyone's family, about boundaries. Who is going to hear about this?
Right.
Because we say, I promise I won't tell anyone. And then we tell somebody else and say, now promise me you won't tell. And so that's not all right. And so people will often say to me, now this doesn't leave the room, right? Says it doesn't leave the room. But they have to be reassured because we all know how human beings are.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting to that point, Mark, and Helga said it earlier. We all, the entire world, has gone through this for the past 15 months.
Yeah.
And as human beings, we love our comfort zones. We've all been taken and placed on our heads. We've been turned around. And if we as leaders in business can recognize that everybody is going through this, that's the baseline. That's the baseline.
But that's also what makes it so much better to be talking about it now, because it's not one person being, put in that corner, you're the problem. It's everybody,
Right.
right? So
Yeah.
we've never had a better opportunity to try to address these things than we do today. I mean, we talk about physical fitness all the time, right? We never talk about mental fitness.
Right.
Yeah, for leaders to admit, you know, that's what the latest studies and articles have been about, is that the leaders have been holding those tensions together. You know, they're worried about the staff morale, they're staying connected via all the virtual platforms. That has taken its toll. So it is everyone.
Yeah.
And to not admit that is in denial, in my opinion.
And we're all good at that.
Oh.
I can deny anything.
And even kind of to address what Mark and Sean both said. Sean, you mentioned about, you know, there's a reason why we have a mouth and 2 ears, and Mark, you emphasize the importance of listening. So in that approach, sometimes that's all it is
Yeah.
listening.
Oh, easily,
able to listen.
50% of the time, it's just me allowing them to say what they need to say in a safe, non-judgmental environment. And they've already decided what they need to do. They have their own options. I might offer a couple of others to give them perspective. What they need is to be listened to. We're not a very good society when it comes to listening. We're great at typing and talking and sharing and posting and have this public image that's often very not real or contrived or a combination of the two. And so we just need a place to safely say it and know it's not going anywhere. And often, you know, to use a cliche, it's true. People will ask me, am I crazy? You know, am I all right? Should I be worried? Should I go further? Is this normal? So I spend a lot of time just telling them what's normal and what's not, and reassuring them, and then giving them information and additional visits to follow up to reassure them, because often people feel alone. They feel like it's just them, which is remarkable in a society so connected. They feel like they're the only ones. And so to say it out loud and ask and be reassured, no, you've got another 2/3 of the country feeling like you, that itself is reaffirming and takes some of the anxiety away. Again, it's having the conversation.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about resources for a moment. And if a business has an employee who they've identified has an opportunity to enhance their mental well-being, Courtney, let's start with maybe some of the community-wide resources here in Volusia County, Volusia and Flagler counties. What's available?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to just call out a couple of things that I think are most important. Begin by triaging the situation, so determining if this is a crisis or not. And Sean mentioned calling 911 if you feel that it's that serious, but there are other resources like SMA Healthcare's crisis line, and their number is 800-539-4228, which should be up on the screen for you as well. Their crisis response team will call individuals, they can video chat with them, they'll actually send people out to the situation to try and provide that intermediary before you have to call law enforcement. So that's just a really great resource. If somebody's in need, they can also text, and that number is 741-741. So SMA Crisis, their SMA Healthcare's crisis line is probably the first one in the case of an emergency. The next one is that if somebody is in need and it's not an emergency, more like what resources are available, where can I go, what can I use, 211 or 211live.org are some of the best ways to just get referrals to resources that are in the community. All of that can help connect you to food pantries or child care centers, anything from other mental health services and counselors that are available as well. So those are two big resources that are available locally.
Wonderful, and those are right here local, so that's great. So Sean, let's talk about what resources, for example, does Brown & Brown offer their employees?
Sure, there are a lot of them, so I may refer to my notes because I don't want to miss any, but at Brown & Brown, health and well-being obviously is of the utmost importance to our teammates. Paul Brown, our president and CEO, has always advocated for prioritizing health, family, and then business. So we have two benefits that are available to all employees across the Brown & Brown family. The first is our Employee Assistance Program. This is a no-cost program, it's confidential, provides access to mental health, including 6 free counseling sessions, 24/7 live support, wellness tools and coaching, access to on-demand wellness activities, videos, and much more. In addition, we also have a crisis hotline. This is a no-cost hotline for Brown & Brown teammates. By the way, both of these programs are not only for the teammates, but their families as well, because We know that if our teammates may be struggling, their families may be struggling with them. So it's good that both of these include the families. In addition, teammates that are part of our Brown & Brown self-funded healthcare plan, which is administered by United Healthcare, we have what's called Advocate for Me. This is a really cool platform. It's no cost, confidential. It's a one-on-one conversation with a healthcare navigator that can answer questions and guide them to the right professional help if they need it. In addition, we have therapists and psychiatrists available. Again, completely confidential. You can make an appointment. It can be a virtual. Now at this point, it can be in person, which we're all thankful for. We have something called a mindful meditation app, mindfulness meditation. And it's simply an app that someone can go to. There's different strategies, techniques, breathing techniques, and it's right on your phone and available. We also have created, through COVID, and it will continue to exist, we have an intranet called The Spot. That's related to the cheetah, which is our Brown & Brown mainstay. But it's called Operation Remote Work. It's pretty cool. We put a lot of resources on there, such as tools for coping with stress, tech tools. Folks are at home when things go down. There's a frustration there. You can't get on that Zoom meeting because the computer just went down. So tips and tricks. We have resources for families. We have something called Cup of Joel. This is a virtual group chat. And we have our health leader, Dr. Joel Axler, who does regular seminars on there on various subjects for mental awareness. In addition to that, we have something called Small Bites. This is 30-minute, simple, snackable conversations. And it could be anything from personal to professional. It may be, for example, one session, how do you organize your closet? The next session might be, what are some, on your keyboard, there are certain buttons you can push and things happen that none of us know about. So it might be a session on technology, for example. So that's a really cool thing. And then we also have something called a peer partnership program. So what we do is we connect somebody maybe in the services division and somebody in the retail division that have the same business and personal interests, so they can get to know each other. They can understand a little more about the culture on that person's side and line of business. So a lot of resources of the Brown & Brown family for our teammates.
And what's great about that, Sean, is Brown & Brown's a big local company, and so you have lots of wonderful things to offer employees. You started out with EAP, Employee Assistance Programs, and many companies do have EAP programs. But if you're a small business and you only have a small handful of staff, you may not be able to have a robust wellness type program. But what I heard there was from the Small Bites and the partnerships, there's still things that small businesses could kind of steal your idea,
Sure.
so to speak. And what I like on the Small Bites is sometimes when we're working even with a small group, and Mark, you kind of mentioned some people are maybe introverted or withdrawal, there's a talent or a creative spark in them that we might not even know they have, but maybe through a program like Small Bites incorporated into a small business, you could extract that out of a team member and never even know it was there, and it could add tremendous value to the team as well as self-worth to the individual.
100%.
It also builds community, establishes rapport, it creates a sense of cultural trust and family, and it's extremely healthy for a company to do anything that helps people feel more loved and cared about, because as we've talked about earlier, our greatest resources is the human beings that operate our businesses and function. So I love those ideas.
Yeah.
Those are great.
Are there some other resources, maybe through the chambers or others,
Well,
Robin, that we haven't thought of?
The thing is that when you were talking, Sean, what made me think is that there are some businesses who think that their employees will come to them. I have an open door policy. They know I care about them. So there's a lot of assumption.
Yeah.
And open door means that you need to walk out and go talk to them, not wait for them to come to you, right?
The door's changed, right? It's going the other way now.
If you Google, like Courtney was doing research for this and talking about things that are out there, the Florida Chamber, for example, has a wealth of information that's out there now talking about for, again, those small businesses that don't even have, not an EAP, but they don't even have an HR person, right? And those are the ones that, there was, I think it was McKinsey, that they did a survey of both the business owners, or the CEOs, and their employees. And where the CEOs saying, yeah, we're doing good. And the employers are like, not so much, you know, and so there's a disconnect. And that's when the conversations need to happen, to sit down. And maybe it's not, it doesn't have to be directly to, you know, how are you, but what is a company, what resources do we need? You know, and just kind of talk about, you know, so that, is it something out at crisis? You know, so even if one employee notices another employee, what do they do with that? Because there's not an HR person to go to.
Right.
And so just find out what your team needs and to have that.
I like that you said, you know, it's a key phrase, open door policy, because it covers the bases. But you're right, and this is what I do, and I can't speak for everyone. This is what I do at Halifax Health. I'm sort of concierge. I go out and make sure. I take the pulse of the people, so they don't have to come to me. I don't have to wait, and they don't have to wait. I offer and sponsor and deal with workshops all throughout different departments and custom fit them for that unique culture, because I want them to feel like there's someone that actually has bridged or liaison or even a sort of a concierge ambassador that's always there for them. Because if you just say open door policy, that's nice, but you're quite correct. The data shows people do not don't access
People
it.
will see you walk in there, and
Right.
then what? You know?
Yeah.
That's true, that's
Right,
true.
right.
But you know, the thing is too, I mean, if you take it and you kind of flip the conversation on its side, instead of talking about the individual employee, if you talk about the way the leadership is treating those employees, sometimes we do things and we don't realize we're the cause, right? I mean, and we need to be aware of that. And I can give you two examples. One, during COVID, so many of the businesses were panicked, and you know, we had to close doors, and how are we going to make payroll, and what are we going to do, and how do I get the grant dollars, and especially small guys who don't have the same resources, right? So what do? You know, they send a mass email out to their staff, and this actually happened, saying, you know, due to COVID, we're closing the doors. I'm sorry, we have to lay you off starting 3 days from now. Any employee that receives that text after working for a company for 5-10 years or 5-10 months, it doesn't matter, is not going to want to go back to that company again because they don't feel that they've been valued. And the intent was not to hurt them, it was just a knee-jerk reaction because we're all dealing with stuff we hadn't dealt with before, right? As opposed to a company who, maybe somebody has a little more experience, maybe they've gone through PTSD and the leadership knows how to better respond. They send something out where they, you know, cut hours back a little bit so that they don't have to lay anybody off, or they make other adjustments. So every single thing we do impacts our staff and our employees, and being aware of this kind of information and that it does affect them and how we need to respond to them proactively instead of reactively, I think is just as important of a conversation for us.
And to tag on to that too, Helga, we know that some businesses are today struggling with trying to get some staff back into
Yeah.
the office or back into their day-to-day operations. We also know too that there are some employees that are, it's affected by their mental well-being, and they decide, well, I'm ready for a career change, or
Yeah.
you know what, I'm just going to retire. I mean, that's
Happened
happening
to me.
too.
Happened to my staff. One of our key staff members, you know, has been with the county for decades, as I understand it. Had some illness, some health concerns, and in light of COVID, they just said, you know what, I don't want to come back. I mean, we steam cleaned the place, we repainted, we created a new office, we tried everything to try to create an environment that would be safe and warm, but they just decided to retire. It was just, they're spent, right?
Well, and you make a good point, Kevin, and so do you, Helga, that, and I've said this before, that that's not a popular message, but it's historically accurate to say that change is endemic to the human condition. So people don't like to embrace change. So COVID shows up like a hurricane, everyone's screwed, but yet change is often a catalyst, and COVID was a catalyst
Yep.
for many people, and they decided this is a perfect time, because I wouldn't have done it on my own, to do the thing that makes me happier, or to retire,
Mhm.
or to go and live with my family that have sick parents or grandparents, and so they became a caregiver. So in a way, everything that's necessarily not so hot or exciting, there's always gold in the clouds.
Yeah.
And
Chance
so,
to reassess.
yeah, I have a talk that I do that's it's in the storm. How to be calm in the storm. You don't want to try and avoid it. You want to go through it and get what's in there, because there's good stuff in there. It's opportunity. So many people seized it for what it was, and some are still doing so. But
Yeah.
it creates challenges for companies that now need employees to return. Well, they'll have to adapt. I often say it's not the strong that survive, it's the adapters.
Mhm.
Those who can adapt survive, and they thrive. But there are some that just choose not to adapt. They simply migrate, and that's all right. But it's a challenge for workplaces.
And
Yeah,
even that
priorities
migration
shifted.
is a form of adaptation.
It really is.
Right, I mean,
Survival and
Yeah.
adapting and moving to different places. Again, I have a talk I give that is not popular, but everyone comes to it. It's called All the Gifts That We Got from COVID, because we got a lot of positives from
Mhm.
COVID. Like we get from we learn things, we learn things about ourselves, our community, our world, the meaning of life. We learn so much in the midst of chaos.
mhm.
It's because of chaos that we grow. We are stagnant when things are fine. But when things happen, we are forced to grow. And that's how we are who we are today. Is in the face of crisis and chaos, we adapt.
Nice.
We either use fear or we use faith. Many use fear. They're fear-driven. They're paralyzed. Some use faith. And I don't mean church faith necessarily, although that's not excluded. I mean faith in oneself, faith in one's choices, faith that things have been okay, things will be okay again. And so these are wonderful, albeit scary opportunities, but people with experience and seasoning know that this storm is a necessary process. Some of our greatest achievements have happened only because chaos occurred.
100%.
And I want to look at all of that good stuff that COVID's giving us,
Sure.
but you got to mine it out.
Yeah.
And some people just they have a harder time doing that.
You know, I'm not a betting person, but I would bet that each of us sitting here could look back at the past 15, 16 months, and we've all, in some way, shape, or form, evaluated our lives.
Absolutely.
Professionally, personally, emotionally. As long as we recognize that,
Yeah.
to your point,
Yeah.
everybody's done that.
Well, the priorities shifted, right? That, one of my team is taking, well, actually she moved so she could take care of her mother, and how we have allowed for remote to continue because we still have some of our team taking care of parents and other things. For me, one of the struggles has been the terminology of essential versus non-essential. And I can't imagine what that's been like for the majority of the workforce to be basically told they're not essential. And so that's another thing that's on us to make sure that we tell our teams they're essential.
Again, you go back,
Stress.
we comes back to language, choices of
Yeah.
words.
Mhm.
Words have power, words have meaning, and we just throw them around. Funeral directors are essential, but they weren't included. It's just an example that comes to my mind. They had to take care of enormous volumes,
Oh, my.
and they were disincluded from essential. And we could name dozens of people that really stayed in it, in the
Mhm.
midst of it, while the rest were, sort of in reserve. So I'm glad you brought that point up. I didn't like the word either. Of course, no one asked me. So that
Me
was
either.
that was
That
the
was
word.
the first mistake.
That was the word that they
See?
choose.
That was
You
the
didn't ask
first
Lauren.
mistake.
Because people feel like, well, that they instantly, and if they already have self-worth or feelings that they're not valuable or that they're never going to make it, that reinforces it. That, you're not essential, you're not really needed. That's, my goodness, what a psychological blow.
Yeah.
That's not what you need to hear, so I'm glad you brought that up.
Speaking of words, Mark, you mentioned, going through the storm and the self-introspective look that we've all had to take through the last 15, 16 months. We talked about the signs and symptoms of mental well-being and those that might have a mental health challenge. And Courtney mentioned the Stuart Marchman crisis line. How does an employer, how do we know the difference of the difference between, a mental well-being challenge versus a crisis?
Yeah, that's a good question, and you ask a good question that requires a complex answer. So I'll give you my Reader's Digest version. In general, very few human beings walk around with the DSM-5 under their arm so they could check all the 8 or 6 or 5 or 10 criteria and make sure they've been happening for 2 weeks. Okay, thank you. For 2 weeks. So here's my rule of thumb. My personal rule of thumb is if the symptoms continue for 1 to 3 days, particularly 3 days, we're all entitled to a down day. It's normal. We're all entitled to a couple bad days. Maybe someone has passed away or someone has received a diagnosis of a problem or a chronic illness. Maybe one of our children have problems or we're having relationship troubles. We're going to have a bad day or two. But does that necessarily mean we need to Baker Act? And no, it means we need to be aware and notice. But my own rule of thumb is I give it about 3 days. And so anything that goes beyond or persists beyond 3 days, my red flags go up. But I look for more subtle cues as well when people are having conversations. And I know you didn't ask this, but you shouldn't have asked me this question. Is I look for people who don't say certain things. And they're smart enough to know what not to say to get them Baker Acted or in trouble. For example, it might go like this. How are you? How are things? How's the day been? Well, I think people would pretty much be better off without me. That's a clue. Are you contemplating self-harm? Are you self-destructive? Or, well, you'll miss me when I'm gone. Well, what do you mean by that? Now, I realize that sometimes an apple's just an apple, but I'm always paying attention to the words that people do and don't say because we tend to subtly signal our pain in hopes that somebody will sniff it and do something about it because we're too afraid to do it. And I know not everyone is willing or able or even trained or even wants to do something like this. But having that kind of awareness and mindfulness of not only ourselves but other people and their energy and the pulse on the community, that's key. And the more of us that can do that, we can create this web, this network of caring. We need to develop a better culture of caring. That's the secret, and it's not much of a secret. Other societies have done it. We used to do it years ago. We've become too far. I know people that are 2 offices down that won't get up and walk in the office. They'll email. Just get up and walk over. They're human. And so we accidentally fall into efficiency while we sacrifice humanity. And I've often said, don't be a human doing, be a human being. And there are so many easy things we can simply resort to that we used to regularly do that technology, and it's great, has sort of accidentally taken away from us. So we need to be mindful.
You mentioned an interesting keyword, culture. For years, the corporations have been discussing culture, have culture committees, diversity committees. It's important that you include in your culture conversations at leaders mental awareness and mental fitness.
Yep.
Because the days of culture, we're gonna make sure they have fun, we're gonna make sure they're motivated. That applies, but there's more to it now. Mental health. How is the mental health of our teammates? What can we do to improve that culture? So it's a really important conversation within organizations.
Oh yeah, we used to organize weekends that were paid for an entire day. All kinds of fun and parks and relaxations that we're going back 10 years now, and nobody came because they're too sad, they just want to be left alone. And part of the problem is, perhaps in some cases, they're workmates. So the last thing they're going to do is go and spend time in a park with the people they hate or that they're angry with. So we just need to be more sensitive to what human beings actually need, and it shouldn't be hard because we are human.
So that's a good point, and you have the experience and the background to be able to ask those probing questions and be able to get to that with people. But for those organizations that don't have that, there's actually a free resource where SMA Healthcare will come out and do mental health first aid training. Wow. So in an 8-hour training, your staff can learn about how to look at the warning signs and the triggers and then what to do. Right. What do those next steps look like with those employees to help get them the resources that they need? So I would highly recommend that one as something that if you have a culture that values mental wellness, then you would invest in that for your team.
And I would emphasize too, again, going back to it doesn't matter how big or small your business is. That resource is available, even if you're a small, mom and pop shop. It's available to you.
That's a good reminder too. We've had our team do that because as a service industry, who's walking through our doors right now has a lot of issues as well. They're very angry because they lost their jobs permanently, and
Mhm.
so now they have to navigate through that next. I'm wondering if we should maybe pull together, have a symposium of something and have that, a refresher.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking the same thing. Maybe there's something like that we need to put together, because those free resources, so few know about those, and we need to get the word out on that. Plus, you had brought up, Sean, that there's apps. I mean, there are calmness apps, there's well-being apps, just making those things available to our employees. Now, it takes away the part of the human side, granted, and we need that piece as well, but if somebody's not comfortable yet coming out and talking to an individual, sometimes those things help to
Sure.
kind of calm the mind and get you to a place where you can have those conversations.
I have a lot of people who are agoraphobes and they have other long-term situations which this recent pandemic reinforced. So
Mhm.
their only lifeline is an app or
Right.
a phone call, and sometimes, many times, they don't even want to see the face. They just want connection, but on their terms. So
Right, exactly.
everything has a place.
It's a type of
And
communication.
not everyone needs face-to-face. They just need to know that there's a way to connect. There's a life raft. There's a lifeline. And that's the key, is letting them know. And then, of course, ultimately, they have free will. They make their own choices, and sometimes choices that we would rather them not make. But we need to let them know it's here. It's here. And I'm glad you mentioned mental health first aid.
Yeah.
I get to do a lot of those things. Here's what to look for. Here's what to worry about. Here's what not to. Here's what to do. People feel very empowered when they don't feel like they don't know what to do or who to call. I think maybe it should be mandatory, but again, no one's asked me. So.
Well, we just did.
But I have no power. I have no power.
But you've been asked.
I have no power.
When you
Mark's
speak
rules
of-
of life.
When you speak of the choices, too, one thing we didn't touch on yet is the risk factors. What are some of the risk factors that we as leaders need to be mindful of?
Well, I know this is going to sound cheeky, but my first risk factor is you're human. You're alive. You're breathing. You inherently have problems. Being alive and breathing and being human, you've got relationship problems, childcare problems, problems with aging, sick parents, with no one to take care of them. Work, anger management, and conflict, hostile work environment problems. I mean, we're all challenged with financial problems. Usually the problems are money and relationships, one or both or a combination, and our public image. All of us are engaged, whether we like it or not, in image maintenance because we all have profiles and stuff like that.
Brands.
So we have to, and so that is, it's fun, it's nice, but at the same time, it comes like anything with, there should be warning labels and there should be classes on what to disclose and what not, what parts of your life should be public, what should be personal, what's good protocol, what's good ethics. So a lot of the problems that we see have to do with our technological advances and the things that we accidentally put in writing, which is not always wise. I tell people don't communicate your deep emotional personal feelings in a text. That's now a legal document. Not to mention, it's more painful when you read that as opposed to saying it. Some things don't need to be typed out. They need to be spoken to face to face. But we've taken it as a convenience, and it's just so quick, and we honestly sometimes let our own mental challenges become used by the devices that we have, and so we get the last word because we can just click and send it, and this is part of the culture and part of the problems that we see happening in the workplace and between work and life. So it's nothing new, Kevin. It's relationships, it's money, it's transportation, it's caregiving for aging parents or sick loved ones. It's the loss of loved ones from COVID itself or a COVID-related illness. It's all the same players that have always been there. They just now seem more menacing.
I'd say too that, there's a group that we haven't talked a whole lot about, working parents who struggled with, do I send my kids back to school? Do I not send them back to school? When you send them back to school, managing expectations for your kids at the same time of having to show up for work. I mean, that was a big struggle I saw for a lot of my workforce and for me personally to try to deal with that on top of running a company.
Sure.
And I think on top of that, entrepreneurs are oftentimes by themselves. They might not have any other employees. So opening up that day is up to them, and their livelihood is totally up to them. Those are the groups that I think about, that I
Yeah.
would check on also to say, well, you know, how are you doing? What was today like for you? Around our dinner table, we do a peach and a pit for the day. So what was your peach, the really good thing that you were excited about, and what's a pit, something that you wish could have been different? And that helps as a parent to manage expectations of what's going on in their lives and why you couldn't go play outside today or why you couldn't do some of those things. But doing that with your team to start a staff meeting or a leadership team meeting is quick and effective to help set the context for what's going on with your group as well.
When we talk about well-being versus illness, you know, a lot of times illness you recover from and you're healed and you're done. But in this case, with mental well-being, there's no sometimes cure or the time period in which you're affected that you're done. And Sean, when we're talking about PTSD, those are things that people carry for years.
Yeah, you'll carry it forever. The key is to seek help if you need it and to manage it.
Right.
Learn how to manage it. I have good days and I have bad days, but we all have good days and bad days, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, there are signs that I've learned with my PTSD when something triggers it and I feel it coming on. There are techniques I've learned to manage it.
Right.
And more importantly, talking about it in itself is a relief for me. So I encourage everybody to, I call it, do a checkup from the neck up. You know,
That's great.
Get into your own head, see what your ailments are, what's bothering you, and do something about it.
Yeah, that's great.
I
great
think we should
advice.
all have checkups from the neck up once a month, just
I like that.
routinely. Even if everything's fine, just, it's nice to be reassured that it is.
Yeah, do an inventory. See
Yes,
how things are going.
absolutely, absolutely.
And Helga, even we were talking, you're part of county government, which is a large employer, but your division is small, and you have a small team that you work very closely with. And as we were mentioning before, small businesses, they're affected by COVID, they're affected by mental wellness, but that's why this is so important for business.
Yeah,
Correct.
it really is. You know, I mean, we are a small team within a big organization, very similar to how you said the hospital. I mean, it's human nature. You develop your family within a larger family. And some of the smaller businesses don't have that larger family to kind of bounce off of. What we're trying to do in our department actually is create an atmosphere where these smaller businesses are interacting with each other more and leaning on each other. So we're going to be developing programs that not only help businesses when it comes to working on their books or their marketing, but also include this kind of a component to it, so that if they need help talking to other HR directors and you know, mental wellness professionals, they can get that kind of a resource, at least know where to send their employees, and again, know how to act proactively. I think so often as human beings who are doing, instead of being sometimes, we do things that we just don't think about the repercussions on somebody else. And they're not meant to be malicious, they're not meant to be rude, they're just meant to be efficient. And if we can take the time ourselves to breathe and look at the reactions, learn from what other people are doing, all of the businesses will eventually learn what they need and help their staff.
And I just want to reiterate too, with what you do with the Division of Economic Development, you know, if you are a small business out there and you have employees that might need some assistance, we can reach out. I mean, they
Yeah,
can
reach
out
out,
to you.
call
You can
us.
share practices from different businesses, like Sean mentioned, the small bites, which we talked about can be done in a small business. And it's really about, if there's anything out of this panel, it's about the small businesses working with each other to be able to share those mental wellness practices, because you don't have to be big to be able to offer it.
Right.
But it's important for business to offer
And
it.
those resources are there. This county has so many
Oh, yeah.
amazing resources. We just have to get the word out. I mean, it could be as simple as taking an 8.5 by 11 and putting it, you know, by the coffee machine or whatever, saying, hey, if you're not feeling great today, you know, call SMA or you know, let so-and-so know. I wouldn't make it one of those pull things where you pull the phone number off, but, you
Actually,
know.
the latest now is you put a QR code on
There
something.
you go.
And it will take you to, resources of some sort. So again, every business needs to figure it out for themselves based on what
Exactly.
their teams need. It's not a one-size-fits-all,
Correct.
just making sure that they are mindful that they need to address it.
There's lots of ways to do it too, on a daily basis, just integrating it into your work. So one of the things that we do in our office is when we have a leadership team meeting, I have some kind of icebreaker question, and they're usually kind of crazy and off the wall, but it helps to put people to kind of shake off whatever they walked in with, and to be able to approach it in a different way. A resource that I received from the House Next Door, one of our other mental health nonprofits, is called the Wellness Wheel. And it covers 6 different areas. So it talks about your spiritual, intellectual, emotional, vocational, physical, and social aspects. And they actually use it on an annual basis when they're doing reviews with people to say, go ahead and set goals in each of these areas. And we care about you as a whole person enough to say that we want to focus on you as the whole person and not just who you bring to work. So I think that was a great resource and one that would be easy to integrate into your company. On a pretty regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
And any business can reach out to us and to get a copy of that sphere. We just had it on screen, and it's certainly a great image to show those important components for mental wellness. Wonderful. Anything else that we want to just touch on for today's panel? I mean, it's certainly a great discussion. It's important. We're all affected by it, and definitely we want all of our businesses, both large and small, to succeed as we open up and continue to keep Volusia County open but safe. All right, well, with that, we'll close today's panel. I want to thank everyone so much for being here today and sharing your knowledge and professionalism. And we hope to have you back again at a future panel or a future activity. With that, we'll close today's panel. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Take care, stay safe, and help your neighbors.